by joining the Foreign Policy Association and by coming here tonight, you, as representatives of the most powerful country in the world, I would say modern-day Rome, you by that say that there is a world outside Verona. And that is perhaps one of the most important things that we have to realize in today's world, that there is a world outside Verona. And that we, whether we are large nations or small nations, have our future put in the hands of whether we will come to the conclusion that good international cooperation is a national interest. We have to move that, to go that road, to come to the conclusion that good international cooperation is a national interest. I used to work for a prime minister who always said, you know, for Sweden and medium-sized and small nations, a strong United Nations, strong belief in international structures, international law, is our first line of defense. That was pretty strong stuff. Everybody liked that statement in Sweden except the Swedish Minister of Defense. But I would say today, it doesn't matter whether you are a large nation or a small nation. If you look at today's problems, you simply cannot make a distinction between what is international and national. Foreign policy used to be there, domestic policy used to be there in the 60s and 70s when I started my life in diplomacy and international relations. But that's not true today. That borderline is gone. Look at any problem. Migration, it shouldn't be a problem. Issues, challenges, migration, environmental problems, communicable diseases, trafficking. Name any of these problems and say to us, ask yourself, what is national and international about these issues? The borderline is gone. We have to realize that the issues that we have to deal with at home are international. Now those that are dealing with international issues have to understand that they also have a national component. That's new. And what is then the paradox that we live in? And I speak now from my experience in the United Nations the last year. The paradox that we live in today's world, in my view, is that on the one hand, we have never realized, isn't that true, that we have never earlier been in greater need of good international solutions to all the pressing issues that are around us. I have never felt more strongly that urge, that need. But, and here comes the paradox, I can't recall a more difficult period to bring about these changes. There's so much suspicion, there's so much mistrust, and in the day and age of fast globalization, many countries, many people inside our countries consider the outside world more and more as a threat, as a peril, rather than as a promise and a potential. And what happens in this world if globalization is seen as something that you want to defend yourself against? What you do is you build walls, protectionism, you build political walls, isolationism, and you build up biases and prejudice, which makes very murky waters for different political groupings to fish in. The outside world gets the jobs, that's where crime comes from, etc., etc. And if we have a world where we come to the conclusion that the outside world is a threat in today's world, then we are in real trouble. So, this work that we are on to now, several of our colleagues here tonight from the UN, of reforming this organization, which is in such bad shape in public opinion, not least in the United States, is one of the most crucial tasks that anyone can face right now. Because if we can't prove that international cooperation is the right thing to do, and openness and free movement of people and ideas is what we are in for. Tolerance and openness. If we go that direction, yes, we may make it. But if we don't, I would say we're in for one of the most somber periods in modern history. That's why there is so much at stake now to prove that international solutions are the ones we need to go for. And of course, what is most important is that this realization is coming home here in this country, the most powerful country in the world. And that we can prove that the word together is more powerful than the word alone. It was difficult the last few years. Iraq divided the membership of the United Nations. It divided, by the way, us in Europe also. The European Common Security and Foreign Policy was in very bad shape because of the Iraq issue. But this organization, the United Nations, was also very strongly hurt. And then we have, of course, the oil for food issue, which made a tremendous impact in not least the United States, rightly so. I mean, we need to really draw consequences from that. But I still claim that there is so much more to the United Nations. Afghanistan is a difficult place to be in right now, but still 60 nations are there side by side on the basis of a Security Council resolution, or two, a couple of them. In Liberia, a woman became president, a country that could have been a failed state. 15,000 peacekeepers are there, and the elections were supervised by UN. It's a now forgotten story. And every day, UN humanitarian workers are helping to fight malaria. Every 30th second, a child dies in Africa out of malaria. And fighting AIDS, dealing with orphans, getting clean water, to the beginning of a project which should give 300 million people south of Sahara clean water. 1.2 billion people. If I had a glass of water, my colleagues would know that I would raise that glass of water and say, this is a luxury. That what you have in front of you is a luxury for 1.2 billion people in the world. We talked at our table, the two things that are most needed today are to get clean water. What a tremendous effect on maternal mortality, child mortality, the health situation in the world. The second thing we needed, and I was reminded of you, I see your eye now, it's telling me, the second thing we need is to give girls education. Girls education. Girls who are educated will educate their children. Girls who are educated in Africa have a 20% or 30% chance of getting AIDS as compared to 60, 70 in South Africa, I think, for those who don't have education. So here we are dealing with these issues together, and if we don't deal with them together, we are in very, very bad shape. Now, where does this bring us? We are in the most important project, namely to reform this organization, and we have embarked upon the most ambitious reform project in the history of the United Nations. It was a bit of a gamble by Kofi Annan, my dear friend, Secretary General, to go for such an ambitious reform proposal. My predecessor continued, and my colleagues around this table kept the pace. And now we are in for a period of trying to see whether we can continue to reform this organization. We have done a few good things. I would say we have done 2 or 3 qualitatively jumps forward for the UN. One is a very simple thing. You know that in natural disasters, that I was the emergency relief coordinator back in the early 90s, Jean-Marc de la Sablière and I worked together on those issues. The people die in the first 64 hours in natural disasters. And we have for years and years done the humiliating thing to ask for money while they are dying, more or less. Do we have enough money to send in helicopters to South Asia? Now we have a fund of $250 million. It's soon going to be hopefully $500 million, which will make it possible for us to immediately send in everything we need to those areas that are affected. Qualitative step forward. Secondly, peace building commission. Why do we leave the disaster areas when the CNN cameras disappear? Afghanistan, case in point. Somalia, I think also. Now we are going to do reconstruction, development, setting up institutions, reconciliation processes, so that the conflicts don't erupt again. In 20% of the cases, in 50% of the cases, in 50% of the cases of conflicts that ended during the last 20 years, they erupt again, because we don't do this. Reconstruction, development, institution building, and reconciliation. Now we have a program starting for this, hopefully before the end of this session, in one of the African countries. And then I'm very, very proud, although some people are not that happy about it, but I think the fact that we got a Human Rights Council was extremely important. It wasn't the perfect construction, but I would say that if we had not made it in these negotiations that were going on day and night for 5 weeks in February and March, if we hadn't made it with that negotiation, I am pretty sure that we would still be sitting in negotiations. Maybe a year from now we'd sit in negotiations, and we could easily have made human rights a North-South issue. Human rights, something imposed upon not least the Islamic world. You remember the Khartoum crisis in February, March? And human rights could have been far away from Eleanor Roosevelt's Universal Declaration and the Bill of Rights, and the whole idea that dignity of man is something that is shared universally as a value. And for me, if we had lost that, that's why I was driven by something, I don't know, it was horrible working conditions those 6 weeks, although I tried to keep a straight face. But I was driven by the fact that if we hadn't made it, we would have lost the soul of the United Nations. If the UN doesn't make a difference for a human being who is in need, who is poor, who is sick, who is oppressed, then we lose the soul of this organization. And I'm so glad that you who were on the side here of this negotiation. And even if the US chose not to vote in favor of that resolution, I was glad to hear from Condoleezza Rice personally in a phone call from Australia that yes, US would support it, US would fund it, and US would in all likelihood run next year. That we look forward to. But anyway, so these were the three achievements that I think we should be proud of. Now, we have a very difficult time ahead. We have to reform the United Nations as an organization. It has to be streamlined. It's hard with 191 nations, and everyone wants to control the budget. And to have a strong Secretary General is something we say, but there is a lot of micromanagement done, and he's rightly complaining about that. And to find that balance is very difficult. And what I would hate to see is that if making UN a more streamlined modern organization would be an issue that is, let's say, an American agenda, that is wrong, because a good and strong UN is in the interest of everybody. And then we have to do more about development and economic and social issues. The three pillars for the UN, in my view, is security, development, and human rights. Without security, no development. Without development, no security. And without respect of human rights, without respect for the dignity of man, none of the above. Without respect of human rights, no lasting security and no lasting development. That's the model. And therefore, we desperately need to move on development. I was just in Nairobi 2 weeks ago. I saw the slums outside Nairobi in Kibera, talking about lack of water and sanitation, the most shocking conditions. And if we don't realize that we have to do something about those conditions, we are all in trouble. And I therefore hope that we will be able to move to these Millennium Development Goals. I always carry two things in my pocket. I carry the UN Charter, We the Peoples, and all this. And the other one, this little thing, which are the 8 points for the Millennium Development Goals. And one of them is, by the way, to get clean water. And another one is for the girls' education. So we have a lot of things left to do. And in closing, I would say in order to do this, we can't do it as a sort of as a UN structure, a system, an organization to which we can point and say, please do it. United Nations is not the universal medicine. Universal medicines don't exist in today's world. We have to do it, work together. That panacea, that universal cure, is not coming from the UN. The UN can be the catalyst for all of us. The UN is us. The UN is a mirror and reflection of the world. But we need to mobilize all actors today with the aspiration and aim, in my view, that making effective international cooperation is a national interest. And that requires us to mobilize not only the UN system and work out an effective system, we also need to get the regional organizations, the European Union to be a powerful actor, take responsibilities, the African Union in Africa, the corporate world, the private sector. So many people I meet in the private sector, and IKEA's representative tonight is a wonderful representative of that social conscience, that desire to play a role also outside the interests of the company. That desire should be drawn upon. There is a tremendous energy, a tremendous power and talent in that private sector that should be used, and not least in this country. And then, of course, civil society, the churches, the non-government, all these organizations that carry this message that there is a world outside Verona. So it's time for mobilization, and it's time for international division of labor, where we all take a responsibility. United Nations representing that universal value, the universal values, the solidarity, the need for international cooperation, but also that other actors also have responsibilities. That's what we need to do right now. And if the United States is on board for this, we will have much more energy into not only the United Nations, but also the whole multilateral system that we have to develop to prove that the word together is stronger than the word alone. I will end on a very personal note. I'm saying that there are two words that Bill and Wendy Lewis have been using them with young people today, but I feel equally inspired by, and I feel equally inspired by the young people here tonight. But there was at the UN was the UN General Assembly full of probably 2,000 kids, high school kids with UN model exercise in front of them. And I said to them, there are two words that are so important for us. It's passion and compassion. Nothing happens in life without passion, on all levels, I guess. And but of course, if you don't have compassion, the wrong things happen. So passion and compassion in combination. And then I ventured also with those young students today to try to remember a quote from Bertrand Russell, who in his autobiography wrote a prologue which remained with me from the first moment I read it. I was 26, 1966, I've already disclosed my age. And he wrote at age 85, looking back at his life after a life as scientist, philosopher, peace activist, 3 marriages. And he wrote in this prologue the following, in the first paragraph. 3 passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, have governed my life. The longing for love, the search for knowledge, and an unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. These passions, like great winds, have blown me hither and thither in a wayward course over an ocean of anguish, sometimes driving me to the verge of despair. Now, let's go for the love, longing for love. Let's go for the search for knowledge. Listen, Johanna. And let's go for the unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. But let's forget about the anguish and let's forget about the despair and go with determination and make sure that we prove that the word together is stronger than the word alone. Thank you very much.